Role player. A term used in many different sports, but mainly in basketball. Having good role players is extremely important at any level of basketball if you want to win, but is especially important in the NBA. If you think of all-time great role players, majority that come to mind are Steve Kerr, Robert Horry, Bruce Bowen, and more recently Andre Iguodala, and even Danny Green. But have you ever wondered what exactly a role player is? I always have discussions with friends, other basketball people, and I say a name, and we disagree on whether they're a role player or not because there really is no definition. Who exactly can be a role player? When is one not a role player? I called Andrew Wiggins an elevated role player in my most popular video, and that ruffled a few feathers, but he just felt like a role player to me. I can't really say I'm right or wrong because the definition is flexible, not concrete. Most people can agree in basketball we have superstars, stars, and role players, but there really are a lot of players that fall in a gray area of role players and all-stars/stars, where they are supposedly too good to be a role player, but not good enough to be an all-star. Like, what are the tiers of NBA players? Can all-stars be role players? Can even Hall of Famers be role players? This is going to be an interesting one. Grab some popcorn or some snacks while I figure out exactly what an NBA role player is. Quick disclaimer, this is my opinion. I'm not here to insult anyone's favorite player or team or anything by calling them a role player. So everybody just relax. It's gonna be alright. And also like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. I'm gonna have plenty of other videos coming out throughout the summer. So like and subscribe if you enjoy. To first understand what a role player is, we need to describe the skill set a role player has and what their job on the court is. Most people tend to define role players as complementary pieces to star or superstar players on the court. These role players can do a variety of things on the court like rebound, play defense, score, pass, etc., usually doing one or two of these at an above average or higher level. Now this is where things get a little tricky. Kyrie Irving, for example, would fall into this category. He is obviously a high-level scorer and a decent playmaker, but is he a role player? Of course not, and that's because he averages way too many points a game to be a role player, and he's a first or second option on a playoff team. Kavon Looney is an elite rebounder and an above-average defender. Just because he doesn't block a lot of shots doesn't mean he isn't a great defender. He was switching on Tatum and locking him up, and his presence is still felt at the rim. So, he is an above average or at a high level in the same amount of major categories in this case as Kyrie Irving. Does that mean that they're on the same level? Let's not be stupid here. No chance they are. Looney is also not a main option on a team either. So that's why it's important to have multiple tiers of NBA players so we can differentiate. And so, I made him myself. At the top is superstar. These are guys that are the all-time greats. They're usually the first option on their teams, and they've shown for a while they are great. Guys like Jordan, Bron, KD, and Curry. And they have to have shown you for a while that they're a star. Then you qualify. A star is someone that is for sure an all-star and doesn't squeak in there. You have to be here for a while to become a superstar. These are guys like Ja, Doncic, he's pretty close to being a superstar, Booker, Levine, and DeRozan. All-star caliber is the middle ground between star and elevated role player, and it can overlap with both. These are guys who may have gotten an all-star appearance in the past or are currently one but aren't good enough to be a star, or someone who's putting up all-star level numbers but hasn't gotten in yet. These are guys like Middleton, Garland, Anthony Edwards, he'll be a star this season, and Siakam. Elevated role player or EVR is someone who may excel at multiple areas, but doesn't score enough points to be a star or superstar, or someone who is just a scorer, but isn't quite good enough to be all-star caliber. Guys like Jaren Jackson Jr., Robert Williams, Terry Rozier, etc. fit this category. Role players are guys who are valuable but aren't good enough in certain areas to be elevated role players, or who just don't score enough points. Guys like PJ Tucker, Steven Adams currently, and Derrick Jones Jr. for example. And lastly is the bench warmer. Bench warmers don't play many rotational minutes. They're usually pretty young. This one doesn't really need too much explaining. So now that we know the tiers of NBA players, let's play a game here called Are They a Role Player? First up is Draymond Green. Draymond Green is an elevated role player currently in his career and has been for the majority of his career. Draymond excels in many different categories on the court like passing, defense, and is an above average rebounder, but he doesn't score enough points to be a star. He's all-star caliber because he's one of the best of an elevated role player role, so this can warrant all-star appearances, which it has to Draymond. It's amounted to 4 for him. All-star caliber and elevated role players can overlap. If you have a good enough season as an elevated role player and you play an important enough role on a good team, you can be an all-star or have multiple all-star appearances, which Draymond has done for the Warriors. What about Scottie Pippen? Scottie Pippen is a star, bordering on superstar, not a role player. I had some people tell me if Andrew Wiggins was a role player, then so is Scottie Pippen, but that logic is so flawed. Scottie was a second option on one of the best dynasties of all time, and he had seasons averaging over 20 points a game. Wiggins has had one season playing with the Warriors as the third option, and although he was very good, it's disrespectful to Scottie to be compared to Wiggs. Scottie did it for way longer and was just better. If Wiggins can cement himself with a few more chips and a few more all-star appearances, then he can move up to the star category. How about Dennis Rodman? He's an elevated role player. He was very good at what he did and mightily important, but he wasn't a primary scoring option, and that's where he's limited to being an elevated role player and sometimes all-star caliber rather than a star on the basketball court. Off the court though, that's a different story. So if Draymond and Rodman are elevated role players, that means that all-stars and role players can be Hall of Famers. The NBA recognizes that these are all-time great elevated role players, and so they can warrant Hall of Fame selections. Guys like Draymond, Rodman, Casey Jones, and even Manu Ginobili were role players. They did so well in their role and were so important to their teams that anything else other than a Hall of Fame induction would be disrespectful. Some may say, how can you call these all-time great players role players? And it's just because they are. There's nothing wrong with that. Role players and elevated role players are such because they haven't hit the threshold of scoring that comes with being a star or superstar, or they aren't a primary scoring option on their team, or both. That number and role varies from team to team, but you have to generally be at least a top 2 or 3 scoring option and average 20 plus points, but this depends on the era. If you can't do this, then in my book you're a role player, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. For some reason, there's a stigma behind the word role player that needs to be undone. Role players should not be looked at as an insult. Superstars and stars are obviously the most important players on the basketball court because they do the most important thing in basketball, which is score. But role players can be just as valuable and integral to winning games as stars. When you look at the best teams of all time, everyone remembers the stars like MJ, but I'm sure Michael would be the first to say he couldn't have won without his role players like Rodman, Kerr, Kukoc, etc. These role players may not be better than the stars, but they can be just as valuable as them. Basketball is a beautiful game because it's a team sport. Everyone on the team provides something, and the best elevated role players can be just as important as the stars. When we're kids, almost everyone wants to be the guy that scores the most and is the flashiest, but that shouldn't be the case all the time. Honor the role player just like any other star or superstar. And so being a role player isn't something that should be looked down upon. It should be embraced, because without role players, the MJs, LeBrons, and greats of the world wouldn't have gotten to the level of greatness they got to without the help of their role players. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Comment down below if you agree with my take on the role player. I know it might be a controversial one, but this is just my opinion, and I thought it was a really interesting topic. So if you enjoyed this, check out another video right here. Like, comment, and subscribe, and as always, stay rested. See you in the next one.